Good morning, fellow Islanders. This is Sir Buckley, and you are listening to episode 3 of the Isle of Faces podcast. I am speaking to you from sunny old England. It is absolutely not raining outside my window, I can promise you that, as well as a fun-packed episode with my guest today where I learn not only how to draw the proper South Carolina etiquette and also the importance of the app QuizUp. Before we get to that, big thank you to Jinx Lier for her appearance on episode 2. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I'm sure you did. Really fun episode to do, even if it did take me months and months to do it. As you can see, I haven't been quite as bad this time. It's only taken a month. Of course, that's no help to my guest today, as this was actually recorded back in December. So, my bad again for that. I'm not going to delay you too much further. We'll get right to it. But all the usual thank yous and more thank yous to everyone who downloaded and listened and commented and all these other things. I do encourage you to get in touch with fellow green men and women on the Isle. Get in touch, tell me what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, how it can be better, what you want to see, anything you can think of. Just drop us a line. We like to hear from everyone. I'm sure everyone's getting nice and ramped up and excited. Season 8 is just 2 weeks away as of speaking. Of course, that is only secondary in everyone's mind because episode 4 of Isle of Faces is also right around the corner. It's already recorded. There's some very special guests that I will announce at a later point, and I'll be getting to work on that straight after I finish talking here. Just as a little teaser, we have not one but 2 guests on episode 4, and also a very special announcement from yours truly. On top of that, of course, season 8 is coming. You're right, I guess we'll talk about it, and we will be doing something of some sort, in some way, on this here podcast. I don't know what it is yet. I'm going to have a think, but I don't think we can let the occasion pass. Before we get to today's guest, it would be remiss of me to claim this is a podcast of the fandom if we didn't talk about the biggest fandom event of the year. I'm obviously not referring to season 8 or even wins. It is, of course, A Song of Madness by our good friends and Isle of Faces alumni Davos Fingers. If you're unaware, this is a tournament held by the guys every year, basically determining which of our A Song of Ice and Fire characters is best. There's head-to-head matchups. We're getting close to the end now, but it is a major event and it's a brilliant way to bring in all the fans. You can see everyone coming out of the woodwork, everyone's involved, newcomers, oldcomers, if that's a word, and really interesting debates and arguments about this character, that character, and why they match up. Or if you're not interested in that, you can have a look at my incredibly funny, witty, brilliant tweets where I'm using a different set of criteria every single day to decide the winner. So shout out to Scan and Matt of Davos Fingers for bringing that to us again. Thank you guys. It's always a great time of year and you do us all a fantastic service. Can't wait to see who the winner is. It's Davos. As I said, this was recorded all the way back in December, so my apologies to my lovely guest Vanessa. We also had a bit of audio trouble, my fault entirely. So there was a bit of me not being very loud, and there's a bit of us talking over one another, but I think I got away with it. Do let me know if I didn't. I'm still learning what all these lovely buttons on Audacity do. So far I've really just learnt pause. I was very lucky to have today's guest. She's literally all over the fandom. We can't get away from her. She's got fingerprints on podcasts, on artwork, on articles. She's everywhere. So we might as well have her here on the island as well. And by now, I think you probably know who I'm talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, children of the forest, my guest this week is Vanessa Cole. Vanessa, welcome, and how are you today?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here.
No problem. I'm happy you came. I'm going to guess you're a woman with not a lot of free time. So I just want to extend not just my thanks for coming on and chatting in the first place, but I also need to thank you for all the time you do manage to spend creating gorgeous content for all our senses to devour. And I think I speak for everyone listening when I tell you how grateful we are.
Well, thanks. It's always nice to hear that. Yeah. I do a lot of my work for myself, but of course I love hearing that other people appreciate it too.
Yeah, it's a lucky byproduct.
Yes, definitely.
I think probably I'm going to guess that everyone listening has already heard your name anyway, and I've certainly left enough hints, but could you kind of give us a quick paragraph on who exactly you are and how you interact with our lovely fandom?
Yeah, sure. So, you probably either know me from my artwork, which I do share quite a bit on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere really, and or you know me from Watchers on the Wall. I am a contributing writer there as well. If you're interested in Westworld, I write for our Westworld sister site. So you probably know me from one of those places.
Multifaceted.
Yes, I try.
Lots of us to talk about then. And people might even want to check out your art and everything else while they're listening to this. So is there, I think we call that synergy in the business. Where can they find you on social media and the internet, or where can they find your art?
Oh, yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter. It's at VK Cole Artist, at VK Cole Art on Instagram, VK Cole Art on Tumblr. And then I also have a Facebook page, VK Cole Art. Pretty easy. I try to keep it simple enough so that you can find me on any of the social medias.
Even more synergy.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So like I just said, you've given us a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, but the main subject of today's episode, and I hope this isn't a surprise, is you. We want to talk about you, and that's you as a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, but also as a content creator and just as a person in general, because you obviously have a lot of fans, and I think they'd like the chance to get to know you. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Brilliant. I'm never quite sure where to start at this point in the episode, so just this once I'm going to start off with when I first became aware of you, and that, like you say, that is through your amazing artwork on Twitter. I don't know, it was a long time ago now, I can't remember exactly when, I don't even remember the first picture I saw, but I do remember them coming up a lot by retweets and people liking them. I just remember being floored at the time. So I think I want to start talking about your art first, if I may. Maybe a tad selfish of me, but that's always the first thing I think of whenever I hear or see your name. I don't even want to bring in A Song of Ice and Fire or Fantasy just yet. Firstly, I want to get it off my chest that you have a unique talent that genuinely drops my jaw every time I see it.
Oh, thanks.
I
appreciate it.
No, it's quite the experience every time a new one comes up. I'd say that they look like tracings, but honestly, I think that would be an insult. Better than the real thing does.
Thanks.
I tweeted something similar about I think your last one was the Jon Snow.
Right.
Being stabbed.
Yeah. Yeah. Poor Jon.
And I had a lot of responses that said the same thing. So can you just tell us about which mythical beast did you slay in order to gain this?
Well, none, thankfully. I didn't have to do that. No. Gosh, I have been drawing since I can remember. Since I was able to hold a pencil or a crayon, I think. My parents have saved all kind of artwork from when I was a little kid, and maybe one day I'll share those. But yeah, I've been drawing forever. I've always loved art. So all through school, took art classes. Took some art classes in college as well. Yeah. I loved doing portraiture. I loved doing landscapes. And then, once I got out of college, entered the real world, got a job, found a husband, got married, had kids. And so, life happens and things kind of fall by the wayside. And I really got away from doing anything with it for, over a decade. And it's, it really kind of makes me sad to think how much farther along I could be, or how much more I could have been doing if I hadn't ever stopped in the first place. But I'm thankful that I have come around to doing it again. And it's funny, I never want people to think that I'm trying to brag or say, look at how great I am when I post things. But it's I am genuinely surprised at times how well things turn out. And so I just like to share it, like, oh my gosh, you guys, look, I'm so excited. I'm like proud of how this ended up. And that's really, why I like sharing them with people. And I do, appreciate the feedback and all the support that I get. And yeah, it's really, aside from any, if someone does a commission, I make money that way, or if I make a sale of a print, that's always nice. But, even apart from that, I just really enjoy doing it. It's, for my own personal satisfaction, being able to see the progression from when, I think it's probably about 2 years ago now, where I really started back heavily into doing it again. And just this first few drawings that I did, and how far I've come from that point to now is just completely shocks me at times. I'm almost embarrassed for people to see some of those early attempts at portraits, because they weren't. I was proud of them at the time because I hadn't done it in forever, but they weren't great. So I'm just really happy with the achievements that I've made in the time since.
Oh, you should be. I think we're all very glad that you did decide to come back to it. So, I'm assuming you studied it at some point, or you did it at school? How did you get into it originally?
Well, I just always enjoyed doing it as a kid. I think it really kind of graduated from, I loved coloring books, and then when I was really little, and then I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I could try and draw my own pictures and color them. I think it's really where it kind of kicked off. And so, my mom told me that I just always loved doing it. And they got me some art classes. I think I was maybe 4th or 5th grade. Okay. And I remember, well, she tells me, I don't necessarily remember it, but she tells me I used to say, oh, I already know how to draw. Why are you getting me? So, but yes, I did take some art courses back then. And then, we have in schools in the US, we have electives where you can choose additional classes outside of the core, like math and language arts and all of the history and things that you have to take. You can choose additional courses to take during the school year, and I almost always took art classes. So through middle school, through high school, and then I did take a couple of classes in college as well, and just really enjoyed it. And so I kept up with it for a while during college, and then just kind of got away from it, like I said before, with life intervening, and you start a career and you start a family, and so some things just get pushed to the back burner because you don't necessarily have the time for them. But now I've gotten to a point where I make the time.
Oh, good.
So
that's always the trick.
Yeah.
So you've said about this started in your childhood. Where was this? Where did you grow up?
So I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and pretty much lived here my entire life. I moved away. I went away for college, and then was gone a couple of years during the early part of my marriage. But we came back here. We've been back for, 13 years now. And, I just love it here. It's got a lot of history, just a lot of things to do. There's always something going on, but it's also, still kind of have a small town feel where a lot of people know each other, and you have a close-knit community. It's not it's a somewhat of a big city, but it's not so big that you're really anonymous, which I really like.
That's cool. We'll come back to that a little bit later, but what was it you actually studied at college, if you didn't study art?
I was a psychology major.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I don't really do a whole lot with that. So my day job is working with software. I'm in software sales, working with nonprofits, actually. So that's our target market. So really, I guess you could say you use a little psychology.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
But I didn't do a whole lot with it. At one point I had planned on continuing in school and maybe becoming a therapist. But reflecting back on it, I don't know that I could handle listening to people's problems all day long. So I think it might have been a blessing that I didn't pursue that career path.
You're busy enough as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So tell us then about what you were up to and when it was when you first came across A Song of Ice and Fire. Were you reading a lot then anyway, or were you into any other similar series?
Well, yeah, I've always loved reading. I've always loved fantasy, growing up with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and, I loved the Narnia books when I was a kid. Okay. And then, having children of my own, those were really my go-tos as far as some of the first books we started reading together were those classic fantasy stories. So I've always loved the genre. I don't unfortunately have as much time for reading as I used to, but I do make times for ones that are recommended to me, and especially highly recommended, where in the case of A Song of Ice and Fire, it was a friend of mine who had continually recommended that I start reading the series, and I kept saying, oh, it's so long. And I think at the time The Dance with Dragons hadn't come out yet. This was probably early 2011. And he said, yeah, there's 4 books. There's another one coming. I'm like, oh gosh, that's kind of a big time commitment. I don't really want to get involved. but he kept pushing it. And then he said, well, there's a series now. They're making a TV show, and it's really good. I think season 1 had just aired by this point.
Yeah.
And he said, it's really good. I think you'll really like it. It's, really, in your wheelhouse as far as your interests and things that you really get excited about. So I finally broke down. I had some time off of work, and it was summer. The kids were out of school. I think my husband was gone on a trip. So it was just us. And I was like, well, I might as well do something to pass the time. So I figured I was going to start watching the series, but I was like, I want to read the books first.
Oh, okay.
Because I really do like to do that first.
Yeah, that's always best.
Yeah, so I actually got them on my Kindle, and A Dance with Dragons had just come out, luckily for me, so I didn't have to wait for the 5th book. And I read all 5 books in 2 weeks.
Wow.
No kidding. I basically did nothing but read.
Yeah, no stuff.
And it's, that's just how I tend to be when I get really engrossed in a series or a book. And that's
the same way.
The other reason I don't read as much is because I know once I start, if I really like it, I will put off everything else, and I just can't afford to do that most of the time. So, but yeah, I barely slept. I made myself eat when I absolutely had to. I didn't neglect the children. I did take care of the kids. So.
They're still there.
But yeah, I flew through them, and I was obsessed. And then I binge watched season 1. But yeah, it was like getting to the end of Dance with Dragons. From early on, I always really was drawn to Daenerys and Jon as characters and their stories. And so, by the time I get to the end of Dance with Dragons, it's like, what? Jon's dead? No, this can't be happening. And so, I really wasn't involved in any of the online discussions or anything like that. But I Googled just to find out if there were any theories about what was going to happen. I was like, surely this is a fake out. He can't be dead. And so I discovered, I think it was Westeros.org, and all of the online discussion there. And I just started perusing every theory. And that's where I found out about R+L=J. So that's something I definitely did not pick up on my own. Yeah, and so it was just fascinating, and because I had read them so quickly, I obviously missed a lot of the deeper, foreshadowing and some of the clues to some of the other theories that were out there, and so I really forced myself to start reading again and, take it slow. And I think I've read the series probably 6 times by now. Wow. Yeah. And it's funny though, because it seems like every reread you pick up more than you did the time before, and you would think after 6 times there wouldn't be anything left, but no, you still catch things in there that you didn't notice before. So I think just it's how the complexity of it and how detailed and how you can always find something new when you read it is one of the things that made me love the series so much.
It almost gets better, doesn't it? Every time you kind of realize, you piece things together, like you say, and it's just, I don't think, I've never found another book that I would enjoy as much reading again as these ones.
And it also, just the emotional response it kind of evokes from you as you read. I know the first time I read them, if I had had an actual book in my hand, I probably would have thrown it across the room after the Red Wedding chapter.
Yeah, a lot of people said that,
yeah, that was just devastating to me. And it's funny because no matter how many times I reread it, I still get emotional. That's just the the wonderful thing about George's writing. It just still makes me emotional even after I know what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm the same. As soon as I read that, I have to put it down and have just kind of a quiet sit for a little while, just to let it pass over me.
Yeah.
Right. So you've answered one mystery for me then, because of most people, you can normally kind of guess whether they either saw the show first or read the books, but because you have so much to do with both, it's quite hard to tell with you. So that's one mystery solved. And yeah, so you've kind of hinted then that that's how you kind of realised there's this whole big, like you said, you went on Westeros.org, and I'm guessing that's the, your first hint into just how big the fandom itself was, let alone the books.
For sure, yeah.
At what point did you start thinking that you'd want to be involved, whether that was writing or drawing, or was you still just kind of blissed out reading them?
Well, yeah, funnily enough, I didn't really get involved in any of the groups or discussions myself. I enjoyed kind of lurking and reading what other people would post, but I just really didn't feel the call to do it myself. I think what really prompted me to get more involved, and this was probably, maybe a couple of years ago now. So there's an app called QuizUp, and there are different topics, of course, and one of them is Song of Ice and Fire. So it's trivia questions on the book series. And so I started playing that. It was a lot of fun, because you can rank up, and my goal was to get them all right. And so it was fun just to play the game. And then of course they have kind of pages, like message boards or whatever, for each topic. And there were the one for A Song of Ice and Fire was actually really involved at the time. It's kind of fallen off since then, but there were a lot of people really engaged with chatting about theories. People would organize tourneys, and so we could play each other and have a winner during the quizzes. And that was a lot of fun. I made a lot of really good friends, funnily enough, through that app, and met quite a few of them a couple of years ago at Con of Thrones, which was so much fun. Finally getting to see all these people that I'd been chatting with for over a year. So that was fantastic. But yeah, so that really got me more into being a contributor, I suppose, because, I would ask questions, or I would, come up with theories and post them and have people comment. And so we got into a lot of online discussions there. And then, a lot of them were a part of the Song of Ice and Fire Facebook group. So I got involved over there. And kind of, it's just branched out from there. I used to not be very active on Twitter, and I've become much more so, especially now that I'm doing the artwork, because it's a good way to just showcase what I'm doing. Yeah. But also, when I first decided to get back into drawing, it was really because of that Quiz Up community. Wow. People would post artwork that people had done from the series. A lot of the professional artists that were commissioned to do specifically A Song of Ice and Fireworks, and I was like, gosh, these are gorgeous. And I was thinking, God, I haven't done art in a long time. And then they came out with that adult coloring book for Thrones, which I did pick that up, and I was like, oh, this is fun. And I, did a couple of pictures, and I thought, why don't I try, doing my own drawings? Because I hadn't tried in, gosh, like I said, over a decade. It really had kind of left it. And so I started doing some, initial attempts at portraits, and they weren't great, but I would post them in our little message board, and everyone was really supportive and nice and encouraging. And so I just kept at it. And my goal was really just to improve myself and just see how much better I could get. And I've really tried to, do a little bit each day, if at all possible. And, I've actually, done quite a bit of artwork since then. Like I said, it's probably been at least a couple of years now since I started back. So, but yeah, I can't give enough appreciation to all of my fandom friends for being so encouraging and supportive in the beginning, because if they hadn't been, I probably would have given it back up, and I wouldn't have gotten to where I am now.
Good job, team.
Yes, definitely.
That's a wonderful story about how you got involved. It's definitely not the normal way that people found the fandom, but I do remember that app. I'm sure I went on it a few times, but I didn't realize there was this whole community about it. So that's great. Right. It's always good to hear a different way of people getting involved.
I'm a super competitive person, so I think that really is what kind of sucked me into that. Yeah, I was like, oh, I can do this. I love trivia. I love winning trivia. So it was fun. But yeah, everyone made it a lot of fun. It was really enjoyable.
That's great. Okay, so then you started off putting your artwork back into the app and the fandom. At what point did that turn into wanting to write about it?
So I ended up actually getting laid off at my job. Probably. This was like the end of 2015. Mm-hmm. And so as I was looking for other work to fill the time, I was like, I'm going to try starting a blog and let's see if I can make anything out of it. It didn't really go anywhere, but it was fun for me. I would, do recaps of Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. I would, post essays of characters or theories that I enjoyed reading about and putting my own thoughts on them. And, like I said, I found new work, and that kind of went to the wayside, but I did still have a lot of that writing still out there. And I got involved in watching Westworld. Really loved the first season. I loved the kind of the mystery behind it. And because it had such an engaging fandom there too, where people would share theories and bounce questions off each other on it. Yeah. And so, I think that's one of the things I enjoy most about A Song of Ice and Fire as well, is that the engagement online with everyone, discussing different aspects of the story. And you can really found that with that show too. And so I loved reading all of the articles and all of the theories about it. And then I noticed that Westworld Watchers, which is a sister site to Watchers on the Wall, which I'd long been reading them for all of my Game of Thrones news and all of their recaps and everything. And so I saw that Westworld Watchers was looking for writers. And thinking I was still looking for work at this time, but I was like, well, I did have another job, but I wasn't happy with it. So I was, looking for other things. But I was like, why not? I could do this on the side while I'm looking for something else. And so I submitted to them, and I just put in a couple of links to some of those old essays and articles that I had done on my defunct blog. And luckily enough, they decided to bring me on. And so I got to write for Westworld and got to communicate with all of the people behind Watchers on the Wall, because like I said, it was a sister site, so people running them. And so I kind of sidestepped into Watchers on the Wall from there when, they would have news that needed to be covered and some of their main writers weren't available. I would say, hey, I'd raise my hand. I'm free if you need someone. So that really got me started over there too. And I guess the rest is history. It was funny because, when you're reading other people's work or you're a huge fan of a website, and now I'm part of it, it's just kind of surreal at times. Like I never would have expected to be a writer for them. And everyone there is so wonderful. I've met everybody, and we always have a great time when we're together. And they're so kind and inviting, and I can't speak highly enough of everyone over there.
That's awesome. Kind of fun. I guess you kind of came in the reverse way, so from a Song of Ice and Fire perspective, but you're on both anyway, so that's fine. Yeah. How did you find it early on? Did you ever have any struggles? Because I guess this is a fairly new thing, working when you have your own blogging, do with your what you want. But did you have early struggles early on, or was it all smooth sailing?
It was pretty smooth sailing. I mean, as far as like the content, obviously they liked my writing style and the way that I would do articles because they brought me on in the first place. It was, I guess, more of the challenge was just making sure that everything was formatted correctly and that I ticked all the little boxes, because I was familiar with WordPress anyway, but they had different requirements for what they needed done. And so just making sure that I didn't forget anything or make any mistake. That was probably my biggest anxiety in the beginning. But yeah, it's old hat now. I'm all good now. So yeah, it was pretty an easy transition, I think.
And so how long were you working just on the Westworld side of things, or was it a pretty quick transition into Game of Thrones as well?
I think I wrote my first article for Westworld in February. I guess this was it last year? Time is just a blur for me. I wrote my first Westworld article in February, and then I think it was only a couple months later where they asked me to do one for the Watchers on the Wall side.
Because, not long then.
Yeah, because they needed somebody to fill in. So yeah, pretty quick.
Why do you gravitate more towards, obviously Westworld is show only, but for the Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, what is it, because you were already doing Westworld that you gravitated towards more show stuff than book stuff, or do you still miss book focused stuff as well?
Well, I wouldn't say I gravitate more towards show stuff. I would say I probably write more about it for Watchers, just because it's, especially coming down to season 8, we have a lot more news coming out about it. And so obviously we have to cover those things. And I don't have a lot of time to do like feature stories. I did one on Rhaegar not too terribly long ago that was very book focused. So if you guys want to kind of search for that on Watchers on the Wall, please feel free. Comment, let me know what you think. But yeah, we do try to focus on both there. We'll put out news about Fire. We have covered Fire and Blood when that was released.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of features covering book stuff too, but we try to be inclusive and not segregate out the show fans, because we want them to. Ultimately, we want people that watch the show to read the books too. So we definitely try to be inclusive of both. Yeah. But yeah, I have plenty of outlets for, if I want more of a book focus, with all of the various online discussions, Facebook groups. So
we're very lucky.
I just feel like I'm missing out on anything for sure.
So you just mentioned one particular piece there. I was going to ask, is there one, whether it's early on or recently, is there one particular article or piece that you did that really stands out, maybe that you were just super excited to get out or have read or just really enjoyed doing?
I would say for Watchers on the Wall, it was probably my Rhaegar feature. I was especially proud of, because that was most of the time I had just done news coverage. I just really hadn't had a lot of time to do feature writing, especially because I was covering Westworld too, and I was doing more of that over there because we had fewer people to write for that site.
Oh, okay.
So that was where most of my focus had been. But yeah, I'm pretty proud of my Rhaegar essay. So as far as Westworld, I had a series that I did on the main character journeys for season 1, which I thought was really interesting. And you guys can certainly go over there and search for those too. But it is nice to be able to write more of my opinions and thoughts and not necessarily just covering news that comes out.
For sure. Obviously, due to the nature of the site, and I guess this applies to both of them actually, because you're looking at kind of production news, casting news, what have you, a lot of it can be kind of on the edge of spoilery or straight out spoilery sometimes, I guess. So I'd love to know how, have you had any kind of conflict at any point with that, where has there ever been, you found out something and kind of thought, I really wish I hadn't found that out, because that's something I would definitely struggle with. Like,
yeah.
Hate.
Well, everyone has their own opinions about spoilers. I've never really been spoiler phobic myself. Before I even got involved with Watchers on the Wall, I would actively seek out the spoilers, because they'll post things when they find them out, and they'll hide it, so you'll have to actually click in to see the whole thing. But I would go search them out. I would go find anything I could. I would say sometimes I kick myself. I'm like, well, why did you do that? Because it does spoil some of the excitement, I guess. For instance, there are a lot of things that I found out about season 6 that I knew ahead of time. And I don't know that it really necessarily affected my enjoyment, because I think you can know something is going to happen and still really enjoy watching it unfold. Like I said, I've read the book 6 times, and I still enjoy. There are plenty of parts that I really love reading again and again, and I still feel that same feeling of excitement or sadness or whatever it elicits from you. So I don't feel like it ruined that for me, but I did. So I found out about Hodor's death before that occurred, and so
see, this is I cannot imagine knowing that beforehand. It blows my mind.
So that was a little tough, but honestly, even knowing it was coming, it took a little of the surprise out of it, but I still cried. I still got emotional, and so I think one of the reasons I like to seek spoilers out is because I feel like it mentally prepares me for what's coming. Otherwise, I guess maybe it's just trauma from reading the books the first time and having about the Red Wedding coming. And I was so mad at my friend that recommended this to me. I texted him right away. I'm like, what did you do? I hate you so much right now. So maybe that's part of it. I like to be prepared, and I like to know. It's funny going to season 8, though. I really haven't heard much of anything in the way of spoilers. So this is going to be, unless something happens in the next few months, it's going to be an interesting experience knowing pretty much nothing about what's coming. So I'm a little apprehensive, actually, about that.
It's a fairly... Well, they try to be a fairly tight-lipped production anyway, but that's obviously gone up and up as the seasons have gone on. So I guess this is max effort now, isn't it?
It is, yeah. We can definitely tell that they have locked things down way more than
the clamps.
I think one of the things that bothered me most about season 7 was, it's not the first time an episode leaked early, but having the spoils of war get leaked early. That really made me angry, because it's fine if you want to go seek that out, that's fine, but don't ruin it for everyone else by posting stuff online for everyone to see. And it's just kind of unfair for people like that to think, well, you just stay off the internet, stay off social media. I'm like, it came out several days, I think, before the episode aired, and that's asking a lot to just completely be offline for several days. That's crazy. So yeah, that did irritate me, and that's what bothers me most about spoilers, is just when people feel the need to ruin it for everyone else.
Yeah, it's just, like you say, it's kind of each to their own, but that's when it gets annoying, is when people
keep it to yourself unless someone asks for it.
It was season 5, like for the first 4 came up at once, didn't they? Yeah. That's right. Oh well. Okay, great. Let's take the midway break here then before we move on. So we have some extra little questions for you in my special segment, which we call Podrick's People. So if you would like to highlight anyone or a group or just someone who you're a fan of, their content they bring, whether that's recently one-off or whether they're doing it consistently, have you got anyone in mind?
Sure. How long is this podcast? No, I'm just kidding. Gosh, I mean, there's so many people whose content I really enjoy, and
We are spoiled.
I will name a few, and I am very, very sorry if I leave anybody out, but I only have so much time, and I can't, name probably the 100 or so people that I really could name. But I'm really enjoying the Nauticast with Emmett and Jeff, Brendan Beefish, and Poor Quentin. They have some wonderful content with their recaps of A Song of Ice and Fire, going through it chapter by chapter. I love Girls Gone Canon with Eliana and Chloe. They do a great job with their character-focused POV discussion. Really, really enjoying that as well. And actually, luckily enough, I'm going to get to collaborate with Eliana on one of our upcoming podcasts for Watchers on the Wall.
Oh, super.
She's going to be one of our guests. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I've long liked enjoying hearing her talk about the series, and so it's going to be fun to actually talk about it with her. I also am a big fan of In Deep Geek. I have actually been on a few of his live streams for Westworld, and I've also done a couple for Game of Thrones: Song of Ice and Fire. So he's got some really great content on YouTube. And then I do have to give a shout out to a couple of my fellow artists. So San Rixian, I love San Rixian's work. She posts on Twitter all the time. And you should definitely follow her if you don't, because she has some really fantastic art of the book series. And then another one of my fellow artists I really enjoy is Jenna Jinx. I think it's I am the real Jenna J on Twitter. She does a lot of show-focused work. She's got some great portraits as well. She does a lot of pencil like me. She's got some wonderful scenes that she's done from the show as well. So definitely check her out.
I think that might be 3 in a row for San Rixian. I think she's been mentioned every podcast. Certainly popular.
She's wonderful.
So. Well deserved, yeah. You've definitely named some of the big dogs of the podcasting world. Excellent choices. Okay, let's move on then. Let's focus back on you. Can you give us maybe your top 3 favourite characters? Maybe whether that's to read or just the ones you like.
So Daenerys, Jon, and the third one kind of changes, I guess, with the book I'm reading. I love Tyrion, not so much A Dance with Dragons Tyrion, but early Tyrion. And he's a character I worry about because of, how dark his character is getting and whether or not he'll turn things around in later books. So we'll see if he remains a favorite. That's a tough one. Jamie is another one. As far as reading the POVs, I really, really do enjoy his. And I don't know that he's one of my favorite people because he's still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, his POVs are really, really fun to read. Of course, I love Arya, Sansa, but I guess. Really, Daenerys and Jon are just the two that I gravitate toward most, and it's probably because I can see some of myself in their characters.
Interesting.
And so that's probably why. And Catelyn was another one I really enjoyed early on, and I still do enjoy her chapters. And I do identify with her a lot, because obviously she's a mom. I'm a mom. You can't help but do that.
Yeah.
But it's tough for me to read her chapters now, just knowing where things are for her. So that's rough.
Creeping dread, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, Tyrion is definitely. I probably find him the hardest to just guess. With most of the others, you at least have some kind of sense thematically of where they're gonna end up. But he's really a bit of a wild card, isn't he? At this stage.
I agree. I mean, he could really go either way.
Yeah.
I think, at this point, it's kind of stressful.
Yeah. What about the opposite? Is there any areas of the story or characters you find quite a slog? Any chapters that come up and you get a bit of a groan?
Honestly, while I did enjoy these chapters on my first read, I really have a hard time reading Cersei chapters now. Yeah. It was interesting kind of getting into her mind and actually seeing her thoughts after reading other people's point of view of her, but it's hard now. I find her so irritating. And some of the stupidity, I can't. It makes it a little difficult. And then, I'm not hugely invested in the Iron Island storylines. I do love Asha and Theon, of course, but Victorian, he's funny. He's, it's entertaining, but I'm not I'm not really invested in those storylines, and I'm not invested in like the Dorne storyline. And I think I've said this before, so don't at me, guys. I know a lot of you really love reading about Dorne and reading about the Iron Man, and that's fine. More power to you. I just, especially in the case of Dorne, I really feel like they're doomed. I mean, House Martell, I don't think is going to have a happy ending, and maybe it's because I feel that way. I don't want to become emotionally invested in a story that I know is going to end badly. So yeah, but those are probably the hardest ones for me to get through when I reread.
That is a favorite game of mine, is trying to guess what, not even the characters themselves, just which houses will actually still be around at the end of it. It's quite interesting to try and have a guess.
Probably aren't going to be very many.
Not a lot, no. It's going to be quite different.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Let's get back onto it then. So, like you said, you're on Watchers on the Wall. You're on the Westworld sister site as well, but you've also completed the Holy Triforce, because you're drawing, you're writing, and you now talk as well. You mentioned just a minute ago that Watchers on the Wall recently started its own podcast, Nightscast, which is a very cool name. So Can you give us the inside scoop on the decision, how that came about, and how it's gone so far?
Sure. So we were at Con of Thrones this past summer in Dallas, and we had a live podcast that we did with all the contributors to the site. So we got up on stage and we talked about our favorite episodes from all the past 6 seasons. I think it was 6 at the time, or 7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 7 at the time. Gosh, like I said, I can't keep time straight anymore. It's a blur. But so we discussed, I think it was our top 10 episodes. And it was just a lot of fun doing that and having that conversation with everyone. And so, Samantha Wallace and I, she's at Sansa Snark on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
She and I liked it so much, we thought, it'd be really cool if we could do our own podcast. Why don't we start doing that in advance of season 8? And so it took some time in the background of working through scheduling, getting everything kind of put together and deciding what we were going to talk about. And so we decided, well, since season 8's coming up, let's try and do, recap all of the seasons up until that point. So that's really where we started. We do, cover some of the biggest news items of the past couple of weeks when we do an episode as well. We also try to call out funny tweets or interesting tweets that we see and that we really enjoy. So if you guys want to do that, please do hashtag it at the Nightscast. And we'll make sure to read those on our episodes. But yeah, it was really, Sam and I think we're probably the most enthusiastic about it, and getting it started. And Sam's done a ton of work in the background. She does all our editing. She came up with the logo, which I thought was pretty cute.
Yeah, I was going to say, very cool logo. Like the logo.
So,
like the name, like the logo.
So definitely shout out to Sam. She's done a ton of work, and in the middle of planning a wedding, because she's recently gotten married. So yeah, she really was the main driving force. But yeah, we have a lot of fun doing it. We try to rotate different people, whoever happens to be available that weekend for recording. We have different writers come on, and we've been bringing on special guests recently, which has been a lot of fun as well. We actually, the one we just recorded yesterday, we had Sam Coleman, who played young Hodor in season 6. Fantastic. And so I think that's going to be a really good episode. Hopefully,
can't wait for it
soon. Yeah.
We'll have to tweet that out when that comes. Very exciting. Is it difficult to rotate people in and out, having different? I know obviously it's people you already know and work with, but is it difficult do people forget what they're supposed to be doing, or just how the nuts and bolts?
No, it's pretty easy. We're really laid back, I think, and we just say, hey, who's free this weekend, and whoever wants to jump on and is available, we have them on. So I think it's been, pretty much a core group of maybe 5 of us that has really been able to do it. I know obviously some of our writers are less free than others, so that's unfortunate. But we try to get as many on as we can.
Oh, it's great stuff. It's proven popular already, obviously. Although you say it's focused towards season 8, which we're creeping ever closer towards. So I'm guessing you've kind of got some stuff in the tank ready for that. Is there anything you can give us an idea of how you'll be reviewing that and presenting that, or
Yeah.
are you going to keep us on tenterhooks?
No, I think we can go ahead and talk about it. So like I said, we've just wrapped up season 6, and so we're getting into season 7. We're actually going to be doing individual episodes rather than the season as a whole, just to take us a bit closer to the April premiere of season 8. And I think depending on when that date actually is, because we don't have a set date as of this recording, we may do an episode or two on predictions or discussing individual character arcs and how they've progressed through the seasons. Well, that remains to be decided, but I think we're going to try and do weekly episodes during season 8 so we can recap the previous episode and then give our thoughts and predictions for the one coming up.
Certainly going to be a busy time for everyone, isn't it?
It is, yeah. There will probably be a lot more rotation of cast members on that one. So
scrambling.
Yes.
Good. We look forward to it. And give us all the social media. Where can we find our Night's Cast? Should we want to? And we all want to.
So the podcast is available on iTunes and SoundCloud now. I think we're looking into making it available on other platforms, but you can find it those 2 places. And then if you want to follow us on Twitter, it's @NightsCast.
Brilliant. Super. I'm sure everyone already has anyway, but just in case there's the odd fellow who's been living under hot pie, you should definitely go and find it.
Yeah, come check us out. Now, like I said, I think we try to keep it fun. We try to keep it light. We do get into, it's not just show discussion. Obviously, we are recapping the seasons, but we do bring in a lot of book discussion as well. So
it's
yeah,
impossible not to sometimes, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
All right, I'm going to jumping between subjects, but let's go back to your writing, because I want to talk about Westworld some more, but you write for a magazine, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So my sister-in-law actually works for tourism development in South Carolina, and they started a magazine. It is actually a not-for-profit organization, but they did start a magazine discussing life in South Carolina, or in the South in general. We are primarily focused on the state because we all live here, but we do talk about the wider Southeast mostly. But just Southern culture, tourism, great places to visit, life in the New South, because obviously things have changed quite a bit in the past few decades here. We've got a lot of influx of people moving from other areas, and so we just focus on that. It's all fun stuff. We'll do recipes. We'll do, like I said, places to visit, covering our recent winter issue covered the Charleston jazz scene, which was pretty cool. But yeah, I do a little feature in there every quarter, and I don't know how I got roped into being the etiquette lady, but I I write about etiquette in different areas. So I think I did one about New Year's Eve parties. I did one about online etiquette, which was actually is a very topical subject. Especially I as I was writing it, I was thinking about this fandom in particular, because that's something. One thing I think is admirable about our fandom is I don't see as much negativity and hatred directed at people as maybe I see other places. I think at least the people that I interact with, I think on the whole, even when we disagree, we still are pretty civil to each other.
Yeah, we're very well behaved.
Yes, I agree. So I was actually thinking about how we interact and trying to, make suggestions on how people could kind of carry that out to other aspects of their online interaction. So anyway, but yeah, I thought it was
that's super interesting. That's very cool.
Yeah.
It's definitely, like you say, especially internet-wise, because you've got so many people from so many different, well, it could be anywhere. So the rules are all mixed together. So yeah, that's really interesting. That's very good. Okay, so Westworld then. Now, you've already said about how you kind of got involved with the writing for that first and then jumped across. Obviously, it's HBO as well. And it was, especially when it first came out, and I must apologise because I've only seen the first season. I've been very naughty and not caught up yet.
No problem.
But
I won't spoil anything.
Oh, good. It was marketed as the kind of next big thing, the next Game of Thrones type thing, because it obviously does have a lot of violence and lovely women. So it's kind of selling that same market. But do you think that's a fair comparison? How do you compare? Obviously, you're a fan of both, but how do you? What's the similarities and differences to you?
Well, it's interesting. I wasn't even sure initially that I was going to watch it. When I first heard about it, I was like, sci-fi, I like some of that, but it's not really my main thing that I enjoy. So I wasn't sure I was gonna watch it, but then I saw like who all the people that were cast, and we had some fantastic
Great
actors
cast. Yeah.
lined up for it. And then I saw the commercials and previews, and I was like, wow, this actually looks really interesting. And so I started watching it. Yeah, I will say that there are similarities, especially with the what's the word I'm looking for? The not focus, but the willingness to show violence and not shy away from that in the story, especially given the periods that they're depicting. And it's in the case of Westworld, that's really the critique of the park, is the fact that people come, and because they are interacting with what they don't view as people, they're objects, they're toys to be played with, that they really commit a lot of violent, atrocious acts on them. And so it really does serve the story. You can argue whether or not that's the case in Game of Thrones. There is some gratuitous violence, and especially gratuitous sex, especially in the early seasons with Game of Thrones. But I will say with Westworld, I don't think that's the case. I think that the decisions that they make as far as nudity and sex and violence, I think they really do serve the story they're trying to tell. But one of the things I mentioned earlier, I think is a big similarity, is the fact that you have kind of these mysteries to uncover, or they'll kind of hold back on showing you where the story is going, and you kind of have to decide where you think things are headed, or you have to piece information together to solve the mysteries. And you have the online fandoms that are super engaged and throwing out theories and discussing each episode after it airs. I think that's probably the biggest similarity. Whereas with Game of Thrones, I feel the showrunners are trying to make it more palatable to a mass audience. And so there may be things that they change or omit, or I don't want to say dumb down, but I feel like they try to make it easier for people to follow that maybe aren't as invested in the story, or haven't read the books, or are not as obsessed as some of us are. Because, you obviously have casual watchers that probably can't even keep up with some of the characters' names. So I do feel like they do try to serve a wider market, whereas with Westworld, and one of the critiques is that they've made it too complicated and too hard to understand. And I personally don't feel that way. You can go back and, if you want to go to Westworld Watchers and look at my articles, I recapped a lot of the episodes and made predictions as far as where I thought things were going. And I kind of surprised myself that I was right about a few things. But what I admire about them is they refuse to dumb things down just to make it easier for the audience. They have a specific story they're trying to tell in a specific way they want to tell it. And, well, it remains to be seen how that's going to affect future seasons and where their ratings are going to be. I think they went down a little bit this year, but, still pretty high, staying pretty steady. So I don't think their fan base is going anywhere, but like I said, I do think it's probably more targeted to that segment of viewers that really want to invest the time and the mind power, I guess, to sit down and figure all of that out.
It's definitely not a series you can kind of be doing something else whilst watching, is it? You need to pay attention. In terms of Game of Thrones, do you think what you were saying about the dumbing down, has that happened more as it's gone on, do you think?
Well, one of the things...
Because I would say it's more a symptom of the latest seasons in the earlier.
So, I'm a pretty big cheerleader of the show. And
Absolutely.
As I say that, I don't mean that I just gloss over any of the imperfections and the flaws. I don't. And I'm fully willing to criticize things that I believe deserve criticism. And you'll hear that, on our podcast, we do talk about past seasons and things we liked and things we didn't like and things we thought maybe could have been done better. Where I'm a little hesitant to criticize with later seasons is mainly because I would not want their job.
Oh, no.
Absolutely. It was a monumental task to adapt George's books anyway, because of how complex and how many characters there are and all the different storylines. And it was an undertaking just to get that on the screen. And so, they've made decisions on omitting characters or cutting out storylines or adapting character storylines or, kind of shoehorning one character's story into maybe another character, so they didn't have to, hire more actors.
They've got enough.
But it's, I will say, I can only imagine how difficult it is when you don't have the source material now to go off of. You basically have, especially with, I guess, season 6 was when they really ran out of story. And they did kind of throw in a few things from the books, but, it was really just, they're kind of on their own. So you've got 5 seasons of Game of Thrones and 5 books, and you've already kind of gotten to the same endpoint. And so all you've got to go on is, here's how we portrayed all of this on the show up until this point. And then here's where George has in mind for certain stories to go and certain characters to go. And, that's, it's basically, here's some endpoints and here's maybe a little bit of story in between, but that's really all they had to go off of. Mm-hmm. They didn't have, and they don't have the luxury of time, of years to, develop the story. They're putting out a show, every year, every couple of years now with the delays in the past couple of seasons. But they've got months to write 10.
Not a lot, yeah. Not a lot of time.
7 or how many, they've shortened the episodes.
It's a ridiculous schedule, isn't it?
But yeah, so they're having to fill in all of this backstory, make sure that it makes sense for where the characters are going, and also make sure it makes sense for where they have already taken the characters in the past several seasons. And so, yeah, there are definitely things that I think could have been done better. But I am at this point watching because I enjoy it. I enjoy the story, and I'm not comparing it to the books anymore because I think it's
two different things, isn't it now?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to kind of put it in this box of, this is the show, this is the books, and I'm just going to enjoy it. And, I could nitpick because there are a lot of things that you could nitpick about season 7, mm-hmm. But I will say, as I was watching it, I thoroughly enjoyed it each week. Were there things I didn't like? Were there things that maybe didn't make sense? Okay, yeah, sure. But as far as an experience and in engaging me emotionally, there were still moments where I would cry. There were moments where I would jump up and cheer. I would literally jump off the couch. And so, that's really kind of how I experience the show now. It's just, there's some really, it's gorgeous. The acting is fantastic. There are just, wonderfully emotionally charged scenes and storylines, and I'm still invested in a lot of the characters. And so, and I, you can criticize certain things, like I said, but I still really enjoy it. And I'm excited to see where they go with season 8, just because, I know of some of the behind the scenes stuff and the things that they've done for filming. And I don't know spoilery stuff, but I do know some
direction. Yeah.
Yeah. I know a few certain plot points that are coming, and I don't know the outcome, but just knowing how much effort they have put in to make this season good and to make it better than past seasons, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and be excited for what's coming, because I think they really did take their time. I think that's why it was delayed so long. They wanted to make sure they got it right and give us a good product. And speaking of another show where I kind of compare with, not because it's the same kind of genre or same kind of story at all, but The Walking Dead, I watched that from the beginning, and I have really been emotionally unattached to it probably since season 5. It's now to the point where I have it on just because I've been watching it from the beginning, and I hate giving up on shows once I started investing in it. But it's on, and I sort of watch it. I just don't care anymore. And I think that's what they were trying to avoid with Game of Thrones. They didn't want to get to a point where it's just dragged on for 10 seasons and you have meandering storylines because they don't know really where to go with them, and they're just kind of dragging it out. And so I appreciate the fact that you can say maybe they're rushing things, and maybe they are, but the fact that they're trying to wrap it up without getting to the point where no one cares anymore, and they're trying to do a good job with it. And I think that's admirable. Like I said, I would hate for it to have gotten to the point where ratings just tank and no one watches it.
I do feel, not within the fandom, I think we're all aware, but in the kind of general pop culture fandom, they did used to make a much bigger deal about the scale of the production because it is kind of unique in terms of locations and actors and obviously plot points. And they've kind of forgotten to mention that as much, that it is still, even though there are less characters and less locations, it is still a 365-day thing. Like you said, they have months to write and plot and plan and do all these things that would take anyone else years, most likely, and they don't get the credit they deserve. It is refreshing to hear some positivity about season 7, because it did get its fair share of slating, and some of that was deserved and some of it wasn't. Like you, I'm the same as you watching it. I do think probably it won't have the same rewatch value that the earlier seasons do, but when I was watching it for the first time, although yes, you can tell that some things were not great, there were bits, like you say, there were some of the best moments in the whole show in that season for me, especially not only Field of Fire, but that moment when John's when they're on the lake and kind of, about to die, and as soon as you hear the dragon roar and the clouds go kind of orange, for me it was, well, we've been waiting however long, 7 years for some people, for this whole thing. And I think they did it brilliantly. It was great.
I do too.
Yeah.
And I'm really hoping that we'll see, you mentioned like the characters. There was some character focus, but you got a lot more of that, I think, in earlier seasons. And they were willing to kind of slow the pace down and really kind of get into their heads more and, kind of delve into their motivations and things like that. Which I think more now it's more like, big moments that they're aiming toward, and that's fine. I am hoping we'll get a little bit more of that in season 8, even though there are fewer episodes, and I mean there's a lot gonna be going on. We've got the huge threat from the White Walkers coming, and Cersei's still a threat because she's not planning to help, and she's bringing the Golden Company over and things like that. So but I am hoping we'll get a little bit more of that with season 8. I just, like you said, the rewatch value it's different. Like I said, we've been doing this rewatch, and because we've been doing it so quickly, it's made me really be able to compare seasons to each other. Whereas, and I've kind of changed my mind as far as where I would want to rank them over the past few podcast episodes we've done. I still really love season 6.
Yes.
But I will say on a rewatch, it doesn't hold the same. It has more. I'm an emotional person, so it still has a really heavy emotional impact on me. But as far as you can go back and watch earlier seasons, and like season 2 especially, I think there were so many little details that you maybe didn't notice the first time or so around that you could pick up on. Season 3, season 4, I mean, there were so many things that you could like pull out that you maybe didn't notice. So I think they were just more complex. I think, whereas with season 5, I think what really started the turn toward this more kind of action, big plot point driven story that we're getting now is, I felt like season 5 kind of stalled out, and we talked about this on our podcast episode where we recapped it. But a lot of the storylines just kind of stalled out and meandered, and they really didn't go anywhere. And so I think they were really trying to avoid doing that in later seasons. And like I said, because we don't have the backstory filled in from George, we just, here's where we are in the books as of the last one that was written, and here's where he's going, and we don't have, two books, hopefully 2 books. Who knows where it's going to end up, but we don't have 2 books worth of material to draw from. And so I can only imagine, like, it's tough to try and put together a story and still have all that wonderful complex character development when all you know is where the story's going, and you've got XYZ plot points that need to happen, and you got this big moment here, and this you've got this threat of the White Walkers over here, and this battle's got to happen, and so, like I said, they're wrapping it up now, and and it may be unfortunate that we're not getting some of that rich character development that we did in past seasons, but I do understand why it's kind of turned into that more plot-focused show that we have now.
And we're also, though they're obviously incredibly talented in their own right, we are asking them to replicate one of the most successful writers of all time. It's not an easy job at all.
Yes, for sure.
So they should be. It's interesting you talk about 5 and 6, because I have a bias against 5 in that I remember not enjoying it as much. But then if I do think about what actually happened, if I was to read or watch a recap, I forget how many actually good moments are in it. Whereas it's kind of it's not the opposite for season 6, but I remember really enjoying watching season 6 when it came out. And then if I watch it back, I think there's more, you notice that there's more mistakes. And I guess that's the same with 7, or whatever you want to call a mistake, or maybe not a great idea. There's more of them, but I still say that it gets more right than the very worst episode of Game of Thrones, to me, is still better than probably 99% of episodes I've ever seen of anything. So we're really we are nitpicking, like you said earlier.
I agree. And, like I said, I've read a lot of the critiques, and there are valid critiques out there for sure. But I'm just not one. I'm not one that's going to nitpick, because it's just not that important to me. We still have the books that are still being written, and they're going to be wonderful, and I cannot wait to read them. And so all of that wonderful backstory and character development and all of the side plots and side characters that maybe we don't get to see as much in the show, that's all going to be there. And so I'm going to enjoy the show for what it is, and while we have it, because we've got 1 season left, and I'm really sad about
I'm the same way. I don't say goodbye well, and it's going to be a big old gap to fill.
And regardless of how you feel about the show, whether you love it or you hate it or somewhere in between, it generates so much discussion every week after this.
That's what I mean.
I'm really gonna miss that.
I don't know any. Well, there's definitely no other show here in England anyway where the day after it's came out, everyone has watched it. Because that's most things, people save up seasons, they stream them all at once. Some people don't have Netflix or whatever, but for Game of Thrones, definitely the day after, which is it comes out on a Monday here, on Tuesday everyone has already watched it, and everyone is talking about it. And I think it relates, you were saying earlier about how as a fandom we're much better at kind of behaving and stuff. I think we are also, we're not perfect, but we are better at saying, you can like the show, you can like the books. We're not perfect, but we are better, because, I've never understood Star Wars fans. I've never understood why people get so annoyed about old canon versus Disney canon, because they both still exist, or more to the point, they both still don't, either of them actually exist. So you can just enjoy both the same amount, the same as, like you say, you can enjoy the show and the books. Just be glad you've got both.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I understand, some people will point out that, the show's fine or whatever, but I think a lot of the criticism is that it could have been so much better. And, that may be a valid criticism, and maybe it would have been a totally different story had the books been completely written and published first.
Yeah, but, that'd be an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, but my stance is it is what it is, and it's it's not going to change now. Maybe down the line we'll get another iteration of it, and someone will develop it once we have the complete story, and it will be a totally different animal. But I still appreciate the story that we have now, and I'm going to enjoy the last season and pray for my favorites.
All right, let's talk. I went on a complete tangent then, just talking about the show. I didn't prepare for any of that, but it's fun. Let's talk about season 8 though, specifically. Obviously, that's what a lot of your writing and reporting in the podcast is focused on at the moment. But tell us about which specific aspects or potential storylines are you most either looking forward to, or are there any you go, I really don't want to see that, or any you just think you're going to be behind the pillow for, just not wanting to see?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm anxious to see how the fight with the others, or the White Walkers, plays out on screen. I think it's going to be visually stunning, and I am really worried about our characters. Like I said, I love Daenerys and I love Jon. Show Daenerys, not as much as book Daenerys, and I've gone into the reasons why I think her portrayal isn't as good, mainly because book Daenerys, you're so much in her head that you really get a sense of what she's thinking and feeling and her motivations, and whereas outwardly she has to project this sense of power and strength because she is so young and because she's so inexperienced. She shows any weakness, especially in the culture that she's in. she'll, be eaten alive, basically. So if you only saw Book Daenerys through the lens of other people, I think she would be a very different character than the one that we know from,
Absolutely.
like I said, being in her head. And so I think that's kind of the issue with Show Daenerys, is that you don't get to see her thoughts. You don't get a lot of intimate moments of her doubting how she's performing, or, the actions that she takes. And so that makes it harder. But I enjoy the character. So I'm anxious to see. I'm looking forward to them returning to Winterfell and how that will play out, and see all of the reactions from like Arya and Sansa and Bran, whether or not he even shows any reaction. Who knows? He probably already knows what all's going to happen. But so it's going to be interesting to see that reunion, and then to have her introduced to everybody at Winterfell. I'm looking forward to that. I'm like I said, I'm worried about who's going to live and who's going to die. I don't really want to give predictions, because it's really hard for me to decide who I think is going to live and die.
Well, yeah, I mean, at this point, it's obviously there's kind of the top tiers, Jon and Daenerys, but the second tier ones, Brienne, they're really two. Right. You've got no idea. It could be anyone, couldn't it?
I think, or I will say, I think either Jon or Daenerys lives. I don't think they both die. So I will say that. I may be wrong, but who knows? But I'm not 100% that one of them even has to die. I mean, maybe they will both survive, but like I said, I don't know. But what I'm worried about for season 8 is that, I guess one of my biggest criticisms of season 7 was that storyline with Arya and Sansa, and
common one.
That one really kind of grated on my nerves. Like I really felt like it was a contrived conflict, and I think that's what I'm worried about in season 8, is that we're going to have some like contrived conflicts between these characters at Winterfell, just to make it suspenseful. And I'm just, I'm sitting here thinking, we've got these two major threats coming. Do we really have time, and is it necessary for them to have a bunch of infighting among the characters at Winterfell? So I don't. Yeah, that's one thing that concerns me, I guess. But yeah, I'm really interested to see. I'm interested to see what Cersei ends up doing.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, she's with all of her plotting, and her conversation with Tyrion was pretty interesting last season. So I'm interested to see how that's going to play out, and what the ramifications will be for those two characters, especially, and of Jaime, of course. Like, we assume he's probably headed north now that he's left King's Landing. So I think I'm probably most excited to see what he ends up doing if he goes to Winterfell, and if he does, how's that going to play out with Bran? And then his reunion.
A lot of fans kind of forget that first connection between Bran and Jaime. Yeah.
And then Tyrion, he's there. He's going to be there too. So I think that's going to be some really like dramatic storytelling. Really excited to see it.
I think Jaime would probably be, every now and then I'm kind of walking along and I just suddenly remember that Jaime gave the middle finger to Cersei and walked off. I have to do a little skip down the street because it makes me so happy.
Yes, I think it was one of my favorite moments from season.
It's brilliant.
Other than Littlefinger dying, that was probably my favorite moment.
Yeah, it is great stuff. All right, so compare that to is it similar hopes and fears for Winds of Winter itself? Obviously, we've got different situations for different characters, but what are you looking forward to or not forward to in the book?
I'm really looking forward to some of the kind of lesser character storylines, I think, in the book, because we didn't necessarily get all of that on screen. In the book, I think one of the most pressing things, obviously, is Jon. I want to find out what happens to him, but we kind of already know, because he's alive on the show now. we assume that in the books he's not going to be completely dead and never come back. But yeah, I'm really interested to see Jaime and Brienne, because she comes and finds him, and then they go off, and we assume she's going to take him to Lady Stoneheart, and how is that going to play out? I'm really curious to see where that story goes. And I'm interested to see the whole Aegon storyline with Arianne Martell and how that ends up playing out, and do they take King's Landing from Cersei? And I really want to see what happens when Daenerys returns to Meereen, because I think all of these things are going to play out maybe similarly as far as the results, but the way they get there from the books to show, I think, will be very different. And so I'm excited to see all of that. And then Euron, of course, that's gonna. I mean, like I said, I'm not a big fan of the Ironborn storylines, but I'm terrified to see where that arc goes with him, because we assume he's gonna be like the big bad of book 6, other than the others. So that's
that way,
terrifying to read, I think. And so I think probably the thing I'm most worried about is Daenerys and Euron, if they encounter each other, and how that will play out, because he's definitely not a person you want to be around at all.
No, not really. I guess it was last week now, George had his post on the website, his quite positive post about us getting an end to the series. I wonder if I can pick your brain on that and your thoughts on that posting, and kind of people sometimes being doom and gloom about Winds and when it will appear, or if Dream will appear at all. What's your take?
I'm really optimistic.
Oh, good, me too.
I think we'll definitely get the Winds of Winter, and I'm pretty optimistic about A Dream of Spring. I think the biggest hurdle is getting everything that's planned out for the Winds of Winter into the Winds of Winter, because there's so much. There is a great video, and I can't think of the name of it. Admiral Kurd, I think, on Twitter posted it about how to fit the Winds of Winter into the Winds of Winter.
Yes,
by just like going through all the POVs that we still have and all of the storylines that we know are going to be happening, and trying to fit that into a manuscript that you could actually publish. It's like a very, very daunting task. So I'm concerned about that, but I'm very encouraged. He seems really, he seems happy. He seems excited about the story.
I think that was the main thing to take away, wasn't it?
Yeah,
change of mood.
Really confident. So I think we're close. I really do think we're close with Winds of Winter, and I'm hopeful that once he, like I said, gets over that hurdle of trying to fit all of this in and get to the point where he's bringing characters back together, I'm hopeful that will make A Dream of Spring go more quickly as far as the writing, because he won't have so many plots to untangle.
Mr. Brendan B. Fish himself, he had some, I can't remember if it was on Reddit or Twitter, but he was talking about George's writing speed and how it's been skewed by Winds alone, and he is actually quite fast when he gets his head down, and he was relating it to perhaps Fire and Blood being that kind of pressure release, that stop valve. Maybe that will help him out now. There's definitely a lot more optimism around last few weeks than there normally is. So that's been good.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, right. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, because I think we've established you have quite a lot to get on with. To close, I'm going to bring us back to where we started, which is your incredible artwork, because I've just been flicking through as we've been recording. It still just blows my mind. I don't really think it's real. If I was going to guess, if there was a sign we're in the Matrix, I think this might be it. But maybe you can now take us into some real detail about the process itself. And I mean, I should say this is all going to go right over my head as soon as you start speaking, but there will be a lot of fellow artists or respective artists who will be tuning into their wireless. So maybe you can, from the moment you get the first idea or the first itch to pick up pencil and paper to the moment you click the tweet button, what happens in between, if you can simplify it such?
Yeah. So it just depends on if I am drawing from, like, if I'm doing a direct from a photo drawing, or if I'm doing something like a book character or something like that. I mean, I guess it's a similar process, because either way, I do like to have a reference to go from. So if it's a lot easier if it's a portrait from show character, or a commission if someone submits a photo to me and wants me to do a portrait of them or their family. So if it's direct from a photo, I'll pull it up on my laptop and blow it up to roughly the size of what it's going to be on the paper, and then I do my best to make sure all of the proportions are correct. So I'll take my pencil and mark out little measurements and then transfer it over onto the paper, just to make sure that the eyes are going to be in the right place and roughly spaced the right way, and the nose will be in proportion and things like that. Whether it's a portrait or whether it's a scene from the show, I just try to kind of plot, and that's the most boring part, I think, is just making sure you're plotting out where everything needs to be on the paper. Different people have different processes, I think, for doing that. I know some people use a grid line. They'll draw like a grid on their on their paper and do it that way, like with, real specific measurements. And I just can't do that. It's just too time consuming for me, and it's already time consuming the way I do it. But like I said, I really try to get a rough idea, make sure that everything is in the right place. And what's funny with me is I don't have the steadiest hand, which you might be surprised to learn.
Definitely doesn't look that way. Yeah.
So if you see a rough sketch, like it's not the prettiest looking thing. I've seen some outlines that people have done before they start actually filling it in, and they look, perfect. But I'm not that good. So where I can really get the sharp lines is when I start doing the shading. I find it much easier to make my lines crisper and clearer that way. And then, obviously having the ability to erase, some of the jagged edges, I would say, that also helps too. So yeah, I think once I get into the shading, I don't know, it's hard to explain how you do something when a lot of I feel is instinctual.
Yeah.
So, when I'm looking at a visual representation of what I'm drawing, this has really developed over the past couple of years. The more I do it, I am really able to focus more on all of the details that are in that particular section of the picture that I'm looking at. And I really try to transfer that over into what I'm drawing and make sure that I get all of those little like imperfections or what have you, to make sure that it is an accurate representation of what I'm drawing. And like I said, if I'm doing a book character, a lot of times, I'll use my imagination, but I also do like to have a visual reference. So if there is, maybe I see an image of someone who I think looks similar to what I have in my head of a book character, I'll, take some of their features and use that as a reference. Or if someone has a hairstyle I think looks good, I'll do that as well. Or clothing, I'll get inspiration from actual photos and try to transfer that over to my art. It'd be nice to say it's all my imagination and I can just take it right out of my head and put it on the paper. And I know there are people that can do that, but I'm not quite there yet. Hopefully one day though.
Absolutely, that's great. That's super. I mean, it's interesting to me, and a lot of it I was kind of okay. So it must be even more interesting to people who might have a chance of trying to replicate that. Have you ever really struggled with one particular piece and kind of thought, I'm never ever getting this done, or?
Well, let's see. I would say probably, I don't know if it was really a struggle. I did a recent piece. So for our podcast, I've been doing, a season scene. Kind of representative or one that was kind of iconic for the season that we're discussing. So I've been doing a scene for each season, and I did one for season 3 of Jamie and Brienne when they're being captured by Locke and his men. That background with all of the trees and all of the leaves,
it's tough.
It took forever. And trying to get it to look remotely like trees and leaves and not just scribblings on paper was a bit of a challenge. So that one took me a while. That one was a bit frustrating to get completed, especially when you're under a time crunch. And so I definitely feel for George because when you're under a deadline, it makes it that much harder and that much more stressful and frustrating. Because if I can take my time, it's a lot easier, I think. But knowing that I only had, a certain set time that I had to finish it by made it a lot harder. But then I think, as far as characters, I find Lena Headey difficult to draw correctly, and also sometimes Daenerys, Emilia Clarke. For some reason, I have a hard time capturing their essence, I guess. Lena has such an expressive face and sort of unique features, I think, in that she can have just the slightest little facial expression, but it conveys so much about what she's thinking.
Yeah.
And trying to translate that onto paper is really tough. So I've struggled with that. And then just from a logistical standpoint, Daenerys is hard because of her hair.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do a portrait of like almost white hair and trying to make it look like there's dimension to it. And so it's a struggle. But I feel like I've improved a lot the past couple of years as I've been working on it.
Even if you think you've struggled with any, it definitely doesn't look that way to us. It looks perfect.
Always nice to hear.
I tweeted out if anyone had any questions for you, and we'll close this little art section because Jinx Lear, who was the guest on the last episode, actually tweeted in, and she firstly said that she loves your art, which is not a rare comment, but she also asks that other than just pure practice, which I'm sure is bulk of it, is there anything that you would suggest for people who are learning to draw or want to learn to draw, especially if they're kind of shy about it?
Yeah, so I feel like probably the most important part of it is getting your perspectives right, and your proportions, especially with portrait art. That's really key to making a face look like the person you're representing. And so, just I think for me, it's you really look at studying faces, I think is really helpful, or studying figures if you're doing like full bodies. Just take the time and really look at pictures, look at faces, look at, if you can see like how things line up to each other, and like you can kind of see the shape of people's faces and the arch of their brows, and just really study those things, and then do your best to kind of sketch it out, and just make sure that you're getting everything where it needs to be, and that it's in relation and size to the overall picture is correct, and the relation and size to other aspects of the face or the body. I think what's helpful is if you're really learning, there are a lot of helpful books out there that you can pick up. If you just look for, like how to draw faces or how to draw figures, there are some kind of step-by-step books that will show you how to accurately represent those proportions on paper. And I think that's, they'll have little tips and tricks as far as where you put your markings. Like if you'll draw an oval face, and then you'll like mark a midline like halfway down for where the eyes should go, and then one halfway where the nose should go, and then it'll show you different proportions for where the lips should be and things like that. And it just really gives you a good sense of how a face is laid out, and then how a figure is laid out as well. Because if you don't have those things down first, it's not going to turn out the way you want. So really, like I said, just focus on that. And even if you don't develop it into a full-blown picture, and it's more of just kind of an outline or a sketch, just do that as much as possible until you get really comfortable with translating what you're looking at onto the paper accurately.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm sure a lot of people are going to find that useful and start using that right away. All right,
so.
I've taken up more of your time than I promised I would, because we went on a little segue there. I got too into the conversation. To finish off, then, we do a little thing in front of the faces, in front of our lovely weirwood trees. Some quicker fire questions anyway, if you would be so kind.
Sure.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to merge two here. I was going to ask you which part of the series but I think we've got that already. So I'm going to skip ahead to which A Song of Ice and Fire mother do you compare yourself with the most, or who do you think you're most like?
Well, I would say she's sort of a mother. I mean, Daenerys is sort of a mother, because she's mother of dragons. I have a lot of character traits, I think, in common with her, where, and especially, I guess you can transfer it to motherhood too, where she has really great intentions, and she has a good heart, and she, wants to do things a certain way, and she's not always sure about how to get the results that she wants, and so she really struggles with that. And that's something where I struggle with too, with just, especially when I became a new mother. I was an only child, so and I never, I didn't have younger siblings. I never babysat. I was never one of those people that loves babies and loves kids and wants to be around them all the time. That's just not me. So I had a really hard time as a new mom with zero experience dealing with that sort of thing, and just trying to figure it all out. And so, I identify with her with that, just especially, she's got those 3 unruly dragons and doesn't always know how to handle them. And it's tough for me too, because, I feel like I was kind of, a quiet kid. I did well in school, was smart, I liked to read, and I didn't really give my parents a whole lot of trouble. I was a good kid. So dealing with rebellion and dealing with sibling rivalry and all of those conflicts between
whole new ball game.
3 kids, it's very, very different from anything that I was used to growing up. So that's been a struggle. So I totally relate to her there. And then I also really relate to Kat, because you've got, especially when you have more than one child, and you always want to do what's best for each of your kids, and it doesn't always work out because sometimes it conflicts. She wants to be with Bran and she wants to help him, but she also has other children that need her, and she wants to be there for Riggin, but she knows Robb is thrust in this leadership position, and she has to help him succeed because that's vital to the survival of her family. And so I really kind of understand where she's coming from when you have these conflicts, that you don't want to favor one child over another, but sometimes you're forced to make decisions that have to do with the well-being of each of your children, and unfortunately you can't always be there for all of them all at the same time, and it's a struggle.
Yeah, I bet. That's really interesting. That's a great answer. Okay, secondly then, so we've established you're very passionate about the area you live in and your state, and so I always ask, where is that if you're in Westeros, where would that be? What's the most similar place to South Carolina, do you think? That's a hard one, I think.
It's tough. South Carolina is kind of very culturally diverse depending on where you live. I think Charleston itself would be pretty comparable to Old Town, though.
That's what I was going to say as well.
Yeah, it's the oldest city in South Carolina. I think it's one of the oldest in the South as well. And so, we've preserved a lot of the history. You'll have some cities that are so focused on progress that, they'll develop, and you lose a lot of the history and old architecture that was there when it first started. And so we've really, done a good job of preserving that here. So I would say Old Town, especially, it's on the coast as well.
Yeah, true.
So I think that's an apt comparison. And, the climate, I think, would be fairly comparable too. In the South, it's warm.
Okay. Second to last one. Can you give us your favorite non-major house to read about or think about? Maybe not even a POV house, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
There's a lot to choose from.
Actually, I think after reading Fire and Blood, I would probably say it's Valerian, because we don't get a lot about them in the main books. You get a little bit more in the World of Ice and Fire, but there are some really fascinating characters from House Valerian and Fire and Blood, and so I'm really interested to learn more about them. And hopefully in Fire and Blood Volume 2, we'll get some more of their history.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I'd not even thought. I guess Fire and Blood have opened that question up a whole lot more, like you say. Because not only do we have them, but a lot of the extinct ones we know a lot more about now as well.
Yeah.
Good point. All right, then, to finish off, if we're talking about Night's Cast again, if you were going to have a character to come and not an actor, a character to come and guest on the podcast, who's going to give you the best stuff, or maybe who's going to be the most problematic, perhaps?
If I were doing a podcast with a character, I would definitely want to do it with Tyrion, and not a Dance with Dragons Tyrion.
No,
earlier,
definitely don't want that podcast.
Snarky, more fun. Early book Tyrion, I think.
Flash one would be good.
Yeah. He's very knowledgeable. He knows so much history, and he just seems like he'd be fun, especially pouring a glass of wine and then getting on the podcast and having a chat. I think it would be quite an entertaining conversation.
That's a great answer. That's great. I'm going to have to thank you again, not only just for chatting to us. It was a great chat. We had a lot of fun. Again, I think you can tell when I go off on tangents. But for everything you do for this fandom, everything you're giving us, we're spoiled anyway, but we're definitely spoiled by you. And I've been very spoiled by having you come on today.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate you having me on. I was excited when you reached out to me. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been. Hopefully you'll come back again soon. We'll have to figure out something else to do as well.
Yeah, anytime. Let me know.
All right, before we go, just remind people where they can find you and your writing and your art and your talking and everything else.
Sure. So you can definitely follow me on Twitter at VK Cole Artist. That's probably where you will see me the most active.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also see my art. It's at VK Cole Art on Instagram and at VK Cole Art on Facebook. You can check out my writing at Watchers on the Wall as well as Westworld Watchers. And you can listen to our podcast, The Night's Cast, as I mentioned earlier, on SoundCloud and iTunes, and then follow us on Twitter at Night's Cast.
Super, fantastic. A lot for people to go and find, but it's all worth it. And I'll be putting links to everything in the post I'll put up with this as well.
Great.
Thank you again. Enjoy your week.
Thank you.
And keep it up.
I will. It was a pleasure.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
That's a big thank you to everyone listening as well. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed hearing what Vanessa had to say. It was a really interesting conversation, especially we always like going off on tangents about the show. As she's just told you there, you can find Vanessa pretty much everywhere on the internet, and I definitely recommend you do, especially the artwork. It is something to behold. If you haven't seen it yet, don't deny yourselves any longer. So again, that was episode 3 of the Isle of Faces podcast with Vanessa Cole. Episode 4 will be coming soon with 2 special guests and a special announcement, and it's season 8 soon, so we'll have something for that as well. Thank you everyone for visiting the Isle. Please get in touch. You can find me on Twitter at Sir Buckley, that is the George version of Sir S-E-R, or there will be a special post about this podcast going up on my website, thegrindstone.co.uk. Come and have a look there, because there will be links to all of Vanessa's stuff as well. Thanks everyone, see you soon.